Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. I am really excited to be talking to you all, and we will be getting started in about 30 seconds. Myself, Zachary Davis from Procore, but also an amazing guest speaker, Angie, who is doing some great work with both Donati and Forbes. Angie, do you mind introducing yourself for a moment as well?
Not at all. First of all, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so thrilled to be here. Yes, as Zach said, I'm Angie Donati. I run business development for Donati SPA, which is a mid-sized construction company based out of Italy. But the real reason I'm here today is because I am also very involved in technologies across real estate and construction. I write on the topic of innovation in construction and real estate for Forbes, and therefore I've had the privilege to really be exposed to all the change and transition that's happening in our industries. And I'm here to share my thoughts and experiences on the matter.
Thank you very much, Angie. And what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be sharing some of the research that I've been working on at Forrester with a large group of awesome people about the ROI we've been seeing with construction technology. But I'm also going to be really talking with Angie about what she's been seeing across the industry as well. So one way that I've really been thinking about this with our customers is just what is the ways that people use technology and use software to get benefits in their business. And when Angie and I were talking about themes for today, one thing we were really discussing was how the world has changed, obviously. And part of that change is rethinking how people communicate. And when we ran a survey to nearly 5,000 people involved in the construction industry, we found that communication was mentioned nearly 600 times when describing Procore. And people were saying that 79% improved communication with their remote workforce, or 85% said Procore improves your field crew's ability to communicate site issues. Angie, I'd really love to hear your point of view on this and hear how you are really thinking about how the ways technology is adopted change the way that we communicate in the construction industry.
Absolutely. So the first premise I need to make is that we were all hit out of the blue with the pandemic, well, a year ago now. And I think it showed all the major gaps and flaws in the processes that we had in place across the board, because from one day to the next, we were, well, globally hit by stay-at-home orders. I mean, in Italy especially, we were hit early on and hit very hard, and it kind of showed all the chinks in the armor of the way things were done traditionally. And as more and more people were forced to work from home, I mean, of course, on-site staff unfortunately can't ever work from home. We can't build remotely, but we had to start thinking about managing remotely. And therefore, an end-to-end communication process that allowed for information exchange to be seamless regardless of location became paramount. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Communication became one of the strongest points that construction teams had to fix in order to continue working under duress during the pandemic.
I really like that. And I also want to stop here and give a quick plug. If you're listening to this stream live, you're also welcome to ask questions both to Procore and to Angie in the LinkedIn chat, and we'll try to cover some of them as we have this conversation. I think that idea of communication really connects back to something else you and I were talking about, which was really standardization and doing things consistently in a single platform. Our customers were telling us a lot of the same. They were telling us that 80% believed that our financial tools improve transparency between a project management team and accounting. And also they were telling us that having it in a single platform allowed a better closeout process and 40% faster closeout process by using Procore as their platform. I'd love to really think about those two items almost separately with you, Angie. Starting with the financial side, how have you really seen people starting to move from an era of point solutions and individual pieces of technology to more of a holistic view of what they're doing?
I mean, the end goal with this process innovation and construction is to achieve a fully one platform standard, because there's so many different moving parts coming into play. We were talking about this when we spoke last week, but ultimately, if you think about the building's life cycle, a building or an infrastructure asset or a project's life cycle, it goes from the design stage all of the way through refurbishment at the towards the end of the initial life cycle. And it is so important for data to be available in every step of the way. And especially because, I mean, as you very well know, the construction industry is a market that has very compressed margins. So the greater transparency and the greater clarity of data helps with time and cost savings, and ultimately increases and improves your bottom line. And in a period of change, in a period of disruption such as this one, it is ever more important to achieve those goals, because those goals can be, let's say, good to have under normal circumstances and under normal pre-pandemic circumstances where economies are booming and business is going on as usual. But during a period of crisis, during a period of change, it is very important to be able to secure those points.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. And let's talk about when you say data, actually, let's talk about those compressed margins you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. How do you view the role of technology, the role of a platform to take place in really helping make sure that you have, the consistency of the margins you need to be a profitable business, or on the owner's side to get things done in a way that makes sense?
I mean, it boils down to the goal of standardizing the process so that it can be industrialized. And I don't mean necessarily industrializing it as in building buildings in a factory, because I mean, that could be a blue sky goal for the future. But I mean, in terms of the way the processes are managed. There needs to be full information transparency in order for purchases to be made at the right time, at the right price, in the right amounts, and for the right purposes. A lot of the time, one of the biggest moments in the construction life cycle in which value is lost is because the process is not managed seamlessly. It's managed with a lot of hiccups, and that filters down in a negative way to the bottom line.
I agree with that entirely. And I think that goes throughout the entire project lifecycle. But I know that you had some strong points of view on what that means for improving how we finish a project and hand it over to the operating team and so on. And obviously, on the slide I just showed, our customers were really reporting faster closeout processes as well. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the way you think technology is changing how we go from this is mainly done to this is done and it's being operated by a new team?
Right. Well, I mean, it boils down to comparing apples with apples, right? So you have a project, you have a design, you would hopefully have it designed in BIM in these circumstances. And if you are mapping everything from start to finish, then you can also map your progress in a more transparent way. And so then it's less based on opinion. Unfortunately, I mean, I grew up with the saying that, the site is done when you decide it's done, not when it's actually done. When you just are sick of everybody, you send them home, that's when it's in actual fact, that's not the way things should be. Nope. And with very precise KPIs, it's much more likely that these old ways of doing work and of managing a site will no longer be part of our reality.
I think that's probably a good place to transition to the third major category of data that I wanted to show, which is around those KPIs and around that standardization, because that's something we asked our customers as well, where we asked, do you actually have better standardized processes because you were using Procore? And 89% said they were. And also 71% said doing so really helped them exceed and meet their profit goals on projects according to our customers. Talk to me a little bit more about kind of the specific ways you're seeing processes be, as you said, standardizing the process with that goal to be industrialized. Can you give me a few examples you've seen that other people might want to learn from right now?
Well, I mean, I think what you need to look at in these cases is sectors that are standardizing with greater ease. So, for example, my company works in the infrastructure space, and the infrastructure space is probably the more advanced in this regard, because as we know, construction is unfortunately still a bespoke sector. Now, there's a lot of standardization going into modularization in buildings, but modular buildings are nothing new, but they're not the market standard. Infrastructure construction, it is very much the standard to work on prefabricated modules, and we even build mini factories on site to churn out these massive prefabricated modules, and this is engineered end to end. And it's just one example of how, without reinventing the wheel, if you have good control of your process, then you're able to transform a worksite from something that is entirely bespoke to something that is more standardized. Now, on building sites, on sites for buildings, I mean, in the cases where you can't do this with the materials, let's say with the inputs, you can do it with the methods, and that's where technology comes in. Because again, as I say, if you know exactly where everything needs to be and when it needs to be there, who's doing what, how many people, at what given point in time, how much it's costing, and what's going to happen next, then you're able to replicate an industrial process even with bespoke products.
I really like that, especially that line between different kind of sub-industries or verticals thinking about this differently. Are there any big ideas that you've been encouraging people to learn or take on, from more formalized infrastructure type builds to more home builds, condo builds, office space builds, and the like?
So obviously the markets are very different and the sizes are very different, and it is a fact that on smaller sites it's harder to implement these big standardization processes. But I encourage everybody to implement technology across the board, even with renovation projects. A lot of projects, especially here in Italy, are based around renovation, and they're mid to small sized contracts. But again, they're working off of pen and paper and Excel spreadsheets is always less effective than implementing even a basic workflow management tool. All of the bells and whistles won't work for everybody, but to have total control of your project, even if it's just as an owner or as the owner of the company or the developer, not having to go on site to get answers, that is really a big step forward, especially when you work across a country or across countries.
I think that makes a lot of sense. You commented that a lot of people, and I know this is true for our customers as well, are coming from an Excel and paper world where you have paper blueprints and Excel to manage your checklist and the like. Where do you recommend people get started if they're thinking, wow, this feels a little bit overwhelming to me?
I would say, without reinventing the way they do stuff, I would start by digitizing the way they track their inputs and outputs. I would start from there. I would just start from a digital management system. Without rethinking the actual execution, I would always start from the workflows. And then, as you work your way down, well, as you also start gathering data on your performance, on your sites, and on your behavior, then you can start optimizing processes. And another element, which I think is very important, especially nowadays in the pandemic, is definitely the site safety element. That's a whole other stream. But being able to provide a safer work site and using tech to provide better safety is a no-brainer, especially now that there's a lot of liability around, potential contagion events.
100%. And that's actually something we've been really passionate about in the United States as well. We've been partnering with the insurance industry to make sure that we can really promote the fact that when you build with technology, you actually do build safer. And that's a trend I've been seeing a lot of, I think, both in Europe and in the United States. When we think about that, overall, where do you think the line becomes between those field steps that we're talking about and standardization of the process there, and then going from there into the financial, the accounting, so on side? Because I know that you've been doing a lot of thinking about where those lines kind of come together. And actually, here at Procore, we're doing a whole event and a whole series about that with a cost management summit for construction next week.
Well, I mean, they're all tied together, right? Because let's say your accounting, the financials of a project, how well you have that under control is subject to how well the field operatives record what is going on. So in my company, I deal with cost controls, and the hardest thing for me is always to get budgets from site. So that alone, I mean, if you streamline and automate that, you are solving half the problem, because you need to have full transparency of information between your site and your office in order to be able to be on top of your figures.
Great. I'm going to actually ask a question that just came in the LinkedIn live chat. Thank you very much, Robert, for asking it. And it's something that I may give an answer to as well. But how do you convince subcontractors that really it's in their best interest to adopt technology and to adopt a platform like Procore as well, when you're obviously the general contractor in some cases, kind of setting up some of the project?
Do you want to go first, or should I?
Why don't you go first? I'm out of it. You can see it more generally than just Procore, of course.
So I would say that in general, it needs to be proven to them or shown to them that it's a value add for both. So subcontractors tend to be resistant to change, especially the smaller subcontractors. They're executors, and it's harder for many of them to invest in innovation that goes beyond their day-to-day work. But when you're a larger general contractor, it's very simple. So the largest have the luxury of saying, if you want to work with me, it's either this or the highway, and they impose those standards. But say for a smaller general contractor like us, it's more of a hand-holding exercise of, choosing to grow together.
I like that a lot. And actually, it's really important to me, this question. I like that we got it from the audience, because at Procore, we really think that to build success in this space, you need to be working hand in hand with the owners of projects, the general contractors of projects, and the specialty contractors or trades on projects, all working together in a single platform with their own access to the right information, with their own access to the right data, because their teams, no matter which part of the construction project you're on, are all going to need to be thinking about what is the right information to help me figure out what I need to be working on to make sure that I'm on track, I'm on schedule, and on budget. And that's a really great place where technology can help make that relationship more collaborative instead of more combative. And it's been really great to see kind of the industry involved in that way.
I would add, oh no, I just wanted to add one thing. I liked what you said about the making the industry more collaborative and less combative. I think that is the single biggest flaw in the construction industry, that it's very much based around making money at kind of the loss of other players in the value chain. So there's this very conflictual relationship between owners and contractors and subs, whereas I think it could be much more constructive and much more value generating if there's a more collaborative approach all down the chain.
I definitely think that's exactly right. And I want to be very cognizant of kind of everyone's time as they're dialing at lunch this evening, so on. So I kind of want to just ask you one last question, going from the day-to-day of the construction side to thinking, if you're looking 3 to 5 years out, if you're thinking big vision here, where do you think that we're evolving as an industry, and where do you think are some of the coolest trends?
So, I mean, 3 to 5 years out, I definitely think we're going to see more and more industrialization of our processes. So I really like the way it was mapped out in the McKinsey report that came out last year, where they had that little diagram of how a construction site is managed today and how it will be managed in future. And I definitely think that there's going to be a lot more off-site manufacturing for components, and that there's going to be a lot more specialization across different types of different fields within the construction industry and different roles within those fields. So there's going to be a lot of hyper specialization so that you can standardize one thing and do that really well. And then it's going to be a lot more off-site manufacturing and on-site assembly.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Where do you think, are there any types of technology or major categories of solutions you think are going to be a part of that? For example, someone on LinkedIn was asking about like 5D BIM and some of the more innovative technology tools that are coming in.
I mean, 5D BIM is already starting to come into play at the moment. So you're managing for time and money, which is basically like the holy grail of having your whole project under control. And I don't think you can think about innovating production methods without thinking about cutting edge management tech. I mean, those two go hand in hand. I mean, then if we want to be really outlandish and think, I don't know, 20, 30 years down the line, we can think about robotics on site, even though, I mean, robotics are starting to be experimented with today. And we can start thinking about, massive extrusions of buildings, but I think that's a bit too blue sky for today's conversation.
It might be, but on the other hand, I always like thinking that some of the big changes we're putting into place today are also going to be the building blocks for that future. I want to really, yeah, go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say. I mean, I think that the industry is going to evolve, and it needs to evolve. Which it's good for it to evolve because we all know that one of the biggest problems we have in construction is labor shortage. Because most people would rather not be breaking their backs in the heat and the cold. But the truth is that as the sector innovates, there'll be less and less backbreaking work, and it's going to be much more sophisticated, whether it is machinery. Operating machinery or the tech side of management rather than actual manual physical labor, and that's good because this industry has to evolve in order to attract talent.
I think that's exactly right. And we could have spent an entire LinkedIn Live session just on the labor shortages and the fact that building in that kind of technology and this type of interactive paths that really feel more modern and feel more connected is going to help bring the next generation of people into our industry.
100%. Let's not forget the average age in construction is, I think, 54, and half of the workforce is going to retire in the next 10 years. So if we don't think about that, we're not really thinking about our future.
Wonderful. I think that's probably a good place to leave it. I really want to thank you very much for your time today. Thought this was a really interesting conversation. And as a closing, I am going to kind of play a fun little video we made about the ROI report, but I do encourage you to go to procore.com/ROI and check out the report for yourself as well. It has a bunch of extra key data about how people are using, how they're saving time, how they're saving money as well. Thank you, Angie.
Thank you so much for having me, Zach. It's been a pleasure as always.